My name is Heather Upton, and at 34 I had walked into secure rooms with no windows, briefings with generals, and one spring operation that could have burned down careers, contracts, and 2,000 livelihoods if it had gone wrong. None of that prepared me for my father's retirement party. He stood under crystal lights with a glass in his hand, smiled at 200 guests, praised his talented children, and then looked straight at me in the back of the ballroom and told me to leave before I embarrassed him. He said it into a microphone. People heard it. A few of them laughed. And 40 seconds later, before I could even reach for my coat, a woman from the head table stood up and said one word that changed the whole room. Wait. That is why I'm telling you this story. Because the next voice in that ballroom was not mine. And it did not belong to anyone in my family. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the quiet ones don't need to shout to be remembered and dignity always gets the last word. If you've ever been treated like the least important person in a room by the people who should have known your worth first, this one is going to stay with you. Drop a comment, subscribe, and stay until the end, because the moment my father stopped smiling was not the moment I said anything at all. It was the moment someone else did. I drove 50 minutes to the Ashford Club that evening, and I spent most of the drive negotiating with myself. 1 hour, I told myself. Stay 1 hour, smile when required, survive the dinner, leave before dessert. The gown I had borrowed from a friend felt wrong the second I put it on. I have spent most of my adult life in uniforms or practical clothes, and formal wear always makes me feel like somebody taped a stranger over my own skin. At the valet stand, I checked for the one thing that mattered. Not my clutch. Not my keys. The chain beneath the dress. My grandfather's dog tags rested against my chest, cool under the fabric. Sergeant First Class Raymond Upton, 22 years in uniform, 15 years gone. Pop had been the only person in that family who ever looked at me and saw something before I had earned the proof of it. My father is Walter Upton, and Walter Upton has spent most of his life measuring people by the market value of what they do. He built a reputation, a circle of powerful friends, and a way of speaking that made cruelty sound like standards. To my family, I was the daughter who went into the army and disappeared into a life nobody there understood. The story they preferred was simple. I had wasted my potential, never made much of myself, never found my footing. I stopped correcting them years ago. The truth required clearances. And even if it hadn't, they had already chosen the version of me they liked best. So I let it stand. It was easier than dragging facts uphill through people committed to misunderstanding them. The ballroom looked exactly like the kind of room my father would want at the end of a 30-year career. Chandeliers the size of small cars, white linen, gold programs on every table, a quartet playing softly enough for rich people to hear themselves approve of it. There were framed photos near the entrance, my father shaking hands with executives, smiling beside contracts, standing between people whose names opened doors. There was a printed program on every plate. My name wasn't in it. 3 talented children, it said. Brett. Paige. No Heather. That told me everything I needed to know about the evening before anyone even spoke to me. My place card was at table 11 in the back, between a retired controller and an empty chair. No sightline to the stage unless I leaned. No family at my table, no one who knew me. My sister had arranged seating, which meant none of this was accidental. Paige runs the family foundation now, which mostly means she curates the appearance of goodness and calls it generosity. A daughter she couldn't package neatly had been placed where the photographs would not have to account for her. So I sat at table 11 and folded my hands. People ask why I win it all. The honest answer is embarrassingly simple. 3 days later would have been the anniversary of Pop's death, and somewhere under all the training and all the silence, there was still a younger version of me who thought if I stood in front of my father long enough, one day he might finally look straight at me and see his daughter. Not the family inconvenience. Not the off-brand child. Not the cautionary tale. Just his daughter. The grown woman I had become knew better. That woman had spent the spring helping stop a breach that nearly collapsed the very government program keeping part of my father's company alive. She had watched serious people sweat in sealed rooms over consequences nobody at this party could even name. She had done work no one at that dinner would ever hear about in public. And she still came. Not to be seen. To close a door quietly. That was the plan. 40 minutes in, my brother found me by the bar. Brett is 6 years older than I am and has spent 2 decades perfecting the posture of a son who stayed. He works at Voss Hartley now, carries a title that sounds important in print, and speaks about quarterly numbers the way priests speak about scripture. He looked me up and down and smiled. Well, he said, you clean up better than expected. I told him it was good to see him too. He laughed as if that had been charm. Then he did what Brett always does. He started talking about himself so fast there was no room left in the conversation for another human being. His division, his performance, his quarter, the chairman being there tonight, a promotion may be coming, big things moving, important people noticing. He asked me nothing. Not where I lived. Not whether I was happy. Not what I had been doing the last several years besides existing in family mythology as his lesser sister. Finally, he glanced toward the head table and said, Dad was worried you'd feel out of place. I said, how thoughtful. He just didn't want the night to be awkward. For whom? He smiled without answering. That was Brett's true talent. He could wound you and still leave the room looking courteous. Later I would realize something I should have understood much earlier. Brett needed me to remain unimpressive. The entire architecture of his place in the family depended on it. If our father ever believed I had become substantial, then Brett would no longer be the automatic heir to respect. He had built his life against the backdrop of my supposed failure. He patted my shoulder and drifted off toward the head table where important people might see him being filial. Across the room stood Margaret Voss. If you ever want to know who really runs an organization, don't look for the loudest person in the room. Look for the one people orient themselves around without seeming to move. That was Margaret. White hair cut close, charcoal suit, no wasted gestures. She didn't work the room so much as permit it to come to her. Once, very briefly, her eyes crossed mine and paused. Not recognition. More like a thought almost formed. Then someone intercepted her and the moment passed. Paige came next. She floated over with 2 donors and a smile that had edges. We weren't sure you'd come, she said, looking at my dress the way some women inspect a stain. I wasn't sure either, I said. In that. It's borrowed, I told her. One donor laughed politely, the other looked embarrassed on my behalf. Paige tilted her head. Well, it's brave. There are moments when answering sharply would feel wonderful and achieve nothing. I have spent enough time in pressure to know the difference. So I smiled and said, you did a beautiful job placing me where nobody had to explain me. One of the donors actually choked on her drink. Paige's expression tightened by one invisible notch. Then she gathered her audience and moved away because people like my sister cannot bear being spoken to plainly in front of witnesses. I went back to table 11. My niece Maddie slipped into the empty chair beside me before dessert. 12 years old, smart eyes, dress she clearly hated. Are you really in the army? She whispered like it was contraband. I am. What do you do? I smiled, mostly paperwork and impossible things. That made her grin. She told me about her science project, a homemade encryption wheel she was clearly proud of and equally clearly used to not being taken seriously by the adults around her. So I let her explain every detail. I asked real questions. She lit up the way bright children do when someone finally treats them like their mind is not decorative. The bartender, older man, marine ring, posture you do not lose, refilled my water without asking and gave me a small nod. I returned it. People who have served always find each other. Around 8, I stepped into a side hallway just to breathe where nobody was performing. And there, without meaning to, I heard my father and brother rehearsing the toast. Keep it about Brett and Paige, Brett said. The foundation, the division, all of that lands. In Heather, my father asked. Not with warmth. Not with uncertainty. With the flat irritation of a logistical problem. Brett laughed, make a joke, light, something about roughing it, better than pretending she's not here. I watched my father choose. It happened in under 2 seconds. He looked at the cards in his hand, considered the room waiting for him, and nodded once. Light, he said. I backed away before the floor could betray me and went to the restroom to run cold water over my wrists. I had come to end something quietly. I had not expected to be used as comic material in the farewell speech. For a full minute, I considered leaving right then. No drama, no witness, slip out, drive north, let the family tell itself whatever version it liked tomorrow. But some stubborn 17-year-old piece of me refused. If my father had chosen what I was worth, then I was going to be there to hear the number. So I went back to table 11 and stayed. You should know what sits underneath scenes like this, because no humiliation is ever born in the room where it happens. It has roots. Mine started when I was 17 and standing in my father's kitchen telling him I wanted West Point. He didn't yell. That would have implied emotion. He set down his coffee and looked at me as if I had dragged dirt across a clean floor. "You'll embarrass this family," he said. "Uniforms are for people who run out of better options." Behind me, Pop made a sound in his throat. That was the first fracture I understood. My father had spent his life trying to become the opposite of his own father's sacrifices. To Walter, the army meant absence, small paychecks, grief folded into a flag. He had turned that wound into an ideology. Wealth was safety, status was proof, civilian success was redemption. And there I was, choosing the thing he had spent decades teaching himself to despise. What I didn't know then, what I would not know until that retirement party, was that my father had done more than disapprove. He had sabotaged my first nomination behind my back. My mother had written it in a letter years earlier and hidden the truth where grief would eventually uncover it. He had quietly called in a favor and told someone important that his own daughter was not officer material. Pop had gotten me to the second panel. Pop had helped open the door my father tried to close. I learned all of that the afternoon of the party when I stopped by the old house to pick up a framed photograph Page wanted for the gift table. While I was there, a folded letter slid from the family Bible. My name was on the outside in my mother's handwriting. I didn't read it until later, in a hallway off the coat room. And in that hallway, while my father practiced turning me into a joke, I learned that he had tried to stop my future before it ever began. The room had no idea what sat inside my clutch that night. A dead woman's handwriting. A truth sharp enough to split an anniversary speech in half. I could have used it. I decided I would not. That decision matters. Because people always imagine strength as the loud move, the reveal, the takedown, the speech that burns the room down and leaves you framed in righteous fire. Sometimes strength is refusing to become fluent in someone else's cruelty. Sometimes it is leaving the weapon in your bag. By the time the speeches began, I had already decided that if my father humiliated me, I would stand, take my coat, and leave. No scene, no defense, no letter. I would let the truth stay mine. My father took the microphone. He was good at the opening, thanked the room, thanked the company, praised Margaret Voss with exactly the right amount of humility to flatter her without looking servile. Brett stood near the stage where photographers could catch his angle. Page hovered near the foundation banner she had paid to have printed. My entire family had arranged themselves into a portrait of itself. I was the missing piece they had relegated to the back. Then my father started the part people love most. The children. He praised Brett first, future of the division, steady hand, natural leader. Brett looked like a starving man finally being fed. Then Page, grace, service, the family name carried into the community with elegance. Page put a hand to her chest and let one perfect tear gather without falling. The room loved it. Of course it did. Then my father's eyes moved toward the back. Toward table 11. Toward me. I prepared for the skip. He had skipped me in private for years. This was only a larger room. Instead, he stopped. And I knew. You know how dogs know before a storm? It was like that, a pressure shift, the moment before impact. He smiled. "I'm proud of my talented children," he said warmly, "all of them." Then he tilted his head toward the back of the ballroom. Except for that low-ranked soldier in the rear. There was an uneasy ripple. He could have stopped there. He did not. Some people laughed, the reliable kind, the people who always laugh when power tells them what the joke is. My father spread his hands. "Some of us build companies," he said. "Some of us just play soldier." Then he looked directly at me and the smile changed. Do us both a favor, sweetheart, leave before you embarrass me. No one moved. The room went so still I could hear glass settle. I felt every eye turn toward me. And yes, it landed. Anyone who tells you public humiliation does not hurt is either lying or made of something I am not. It hurt because it was old pain in new clothes, because that sentence had been waiting for me since I was 17, because fathers know exactly where to place the knife. But I am not 17. I am a major in the United States Army and I have stood in rooms where panic kills. I have learned the discipline of not giving anyone access to my center. So I folded my napkin once. I stood up. I took my coat from the back of the chair. And I turned toward the side door. I had made it maybe a step and a half when the woman at the head table said, very quietly and very clearly, "Wait." Margaret Voss was standing. She wasn't looking at my father. She was looking at me. "I've been trying to place you all evening," she said. "Would you step into the light for a moment?" I did. I did not know yet what she saw. She studied my face the way people study memory, carefully, with respect for the possibility of being wrong. Then something landed in her expression, recognition, immediate and absolute. "Oh," she said. Then louder for the whole room. "You're Major Upton." Silence. Real silence this time. Not shocked laughter. Not discomfort. The pure frozen silence of 200 people understanding they have been operating with catastrophically incomplete information. My father's hand opened. The microphone slipped from it and hit the floor with a scream of feedback. Margaret did not so much as glance at him. She walked toward me with the calm of someone who has spent her whole life being obeyed without raising her voice. "Spring of this year," she said, "the Sentinel intrusion." I gave her a single nod. Margaret turned to the room. "I was in the closed briefing," she said. "This company was minutes away from losing a classified federal program that underwrites an enormous portion of this division's future. If that breach had not been contained, Voss Hartley would have spent the year bleeding contracts, credibility, and jobs. The officer who led the team that stopped it declined public recognition because the mission still wasn't over." Then she looked back at me. That officer was Major Heather Upton. The room changed shape. You could feel it. It physically changed. Everyone recalculated at once. The woman in the back was not the embarrassment. She was the reason the tension in the room still existed. I kept my voice steady. "It was my team, ma'am," I said. "I had the honor of leading them." Margaret nodded once, like one professional to another. Across the room, Brett had gone pale enough to look translucent. Paige's face had emptied. Maddie was crying outright, hands over her mouth. The bartender behind the bar had gone to attention without thinking. And my father. For the first time in my life, I watched my father run out of words. Then he did what men like him always do when cornered by truth. He tried to absorb it, claim it, fold it back into himself. "Heather, now hold on," he said, stepping forward. "Of course I'm proud of her. This is all just family teasing. You know how we are." No one laughed. He turned desperately toward Margaret. "She gets that toughness from me." That was the moment he disgusted me most. Not when he humiliated me, when he tried to wear my service like one of his accomplishments. I stood very still and let him hear his own voice failing. Then, because the room was waiting and because silence can only hold so long before it becomes cruelty of its own, I spoke. "Dad," I said. That was all it took to stop him. The whole room sharpened. "You spent 30 years telling this family that a uniform meant someone had run out of better options." My voice was calm, not cold, just finished with fear. "I didn't run out of options, I chose this one." He tried to interrupt. I didn't raise my voice, I just continued. "I chose it at 17, I chose it every day after, in rooms you will never have the clearance to hear about." That landed exactly where I intended. His face changed. He knew then that I knew. About the sabotage. About the call. About what he had tried to take from me before I was old enough to defend it. I never took the letter out of my clutch. I never waved proof around the ballroom. I didn't need to. His face told the room there was more truth beneath the surface than anyone there would ever hear. So no, I said, I won't stand here and become your proof of anything. I didn't come to be claimed. I came to say goodbye. Then the sentence I think I had been carrying toward him all my life finally arrived. And I'm glad I got to do it with the lights on. I picked up my clutch. My mother's letter stayed inside. Mine. Not theirs. Margaret Voss spoke once more before I could leave. Major Upton, she said, with enough care on the rank that every person in the ballroom heard it seat itself where my father had denied it, on behalf of a company that owes you more than it will ever be allowed to say publicly, thank you. Then, with the driest possible glance toward the stage. And I suspect you outrank most opportunities in this room. That got a laugh. A real one. Not at me. The senator shook my hand as I passed. Two donors suddenly wanted a conversation. Brett stood exactly where ambition had placed him, too close to the wreckage to deny association with it. Paige looked at the floor. Maddie met my eyes with the stunned joy of a child watching justice happen live for the first time. As I came level with the stage, I looked at my father one last time. And for half a second I saw something beneath him. A frightened boy who had once stood beside a folded flag and decided that service only took and never gave back. I understood him in that moment more than I ever had. Understanding is not forgiveness. People confuse those all the time. I understood him. Then I kept walking. I did not storm out. Storms are for people who still need the room to know they were hurt. I had no need left. I walked past table 11, past the sweating water glass, past the gift table I had helped set that afternoon, past the bartender who came to attention behind his bar and held it until I had passed. At the edge of the ballroom, Maddie caught my hand. Are you really a major? She whispered. I knelt down just enough to meet her eyes. Really? I said, and you're really too smart to let anybody talk you out of that science project. She nodded like it was an order. Maybe it was. Then I left. The Ashford Club doors opened into cold night air and a parking lot full of ordinary cars. I found mine, set my mother's letter on the passenger seat, touched Pop's tags once, drove north toward Maryland and my own small life, the one no one in that ballroom had ever bothered to understand. For the first time I can remember, I did not feel erased. The aftermath was not cinematic. It was quieter. And more permanent. My father's retirement became known, in the circles that matter to men like him, as the night he humiliated the officer who had helped save the company's future. Margaret Voss did not extend the consulting role he had been expecting. Two longtime colleagues cooled noticeably. Brett's promotion drifted elsewhere after the chairman spent an evening watching how he treated his own sister. Paige stopped mentioning family values quite so freely at foundation dinners. None of that came from me. I said nothing. I didn't have to. People had simply watched character reveal itself in real time. 3 weeks later, my father texted me. 4 sentences. No apology. The last one said, I didn't know about Sentinel. Which was true. It was also the whole problem. He had never asked who I was, only judged the outline. I replied with 2 lines. If you ever want to know your daughter honestly and privately, the door is open. But I will not return to be displayed. He never answered. Maybe he won't. Peace does not always come from repair. Sometimes it comes from finally understanding that repair was never yours alone to do. The next weekend, I drove out to Pop's grave with coffee in a paper cup and sat in the veterans section beside his stone. Sergeant First Class Raymond Upton, same as always, no grandeur, no chandeliers, no speeches. I told him everything. The drop microphone. The chairman. The word major ringing through a room that had spent years refusing to learn it. I told him I never read the letter aloud, that I let the wrong people stay wrong, that I finally understood what he had been giving me all those years ago when he pressed those tags into my hand. Not proof. Permission. Permission to stop spending my life begging the wrong people to see what the right ones already knew. Maddie texts me now about encryption, scholarships, and whether women can really do the work I do. I tell her yes every time. And if there is a lesson in this story, it is not that public humiliation always gets reversed in the same room. Life is not that tidy. Sometimes nobody stands up. Sometimes the truth stays buried. Sometimes the only witness is the one in your own chest. But sometimes, if you have lived honestly enough, the truth finds a voice bigger than yours and walks into the room exactly when it matters. That was my night. One microphone. One frozen ballroom. One father who never bothered to learn the rank of his own daughter. And one quiet moment when the room finally did. If this story hit something in you, send it to the person who needs it. Drop a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.